For 45 years, I poured every ounce of love I had into my adopted son, Ethan. When my husband passed, he, his wife Sarah, and my granddaughter Chloe were the three pillars holding up my world. But I learned a devastating truth to them. I wasn't a mother. I was a bank account waiting to be emptied. And the withdrawal slip they planned to use was a forged medical document declaring me mentally incompetent. This is the story of how I took back my life. If you believe that justice should always be served, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single detail. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples has always been the scent of home, a fragrance I have carefully cultivated for 45 years. I believed it was the smell of unconditional love, of family. I was wrong. It was just the smell of a stage I'd built, upon which a very long and cruel play was being performed. My house, a quiet, two-story colonial nestled in a leafy suburb of Columbus, Ohio. I was supposed to be my sanctuary. It was the place I'd brought home a little 2-year-old boy named Ethan, his eyes as wide and fragile as a fawn's, and I'd silently promised his departing shadow of a mother that he would never feel uncertain or unloved again. I stood at my worn butcher block kitchen counter, my hands, now mapped with the fine lines of 71 years, methodically crimping the edges of an apple pie crust. It was a muscle memory, a rhythm I'd known for decades. Through the window over the sink, the Tuesday afternoon sun slanted low, casting long, lazy shadows across the manicured lawn. The light caught the dust motes dancing in the air, tiny golden flecks in the warm, still space. Ethan and his wife, Sarah, were supposed to bring my granddaughter, Chloe, for dinner. This pie was for them. It was a tradition, a piece of me, made of flour and butter and love. Everything I did, it seemed, was for them. My life's work wasn't etched onto a corporate letterhead or framed on an office wall. It was absorbed into the very plaster of this house. It was in the faint pencil marks on the doorframe in the pantry, charting Ethan's growth from a toddler to a man who towered over me. It was in the memory of scraped knees I'd kissed, the worn-out spine of Goodnight Moon I'd read 1,000 times, the proud, silent tears I'd shed at his college graduation. When my husband Charles passed away from a sudden heart attack 10 years ago, that focus, already sharp, narrowed to a singular, intense point. Ethan, Sarah, and Chloe became my entire world. The three pillars holding up the sky of my quiet, widowed life. I slid the pie into the preheated oven. The wave of heat, a familiar comfort. My gaze drifted to the cheerful clutter of magnets on the refrigerator door, a gallery of my life's curated happiness. There was Ethan, grinning in his high school football uniform, his face still round with youth. There was his wedding photo, Sarah looking radiant in white, though even then, her smile seemed a little too tight, a little too perfect. And there, my favorite, was a picture of Chloe as a little girl, maybe 5 years old, gap-toothed and covered in mud, holding up a wiggling earthworm with triumphant glee. I smiled. A familiar? Aching warmth spreading through my chest. This was what a life well lived was supposed to look like. This was my legacy. The jingle of my car keys on the counter was a dissonant sound in my peaceful kitchen. It was time for my 3-month checkup with Dr. Chen. I never missed an appointment. It felt like a betrayal of a promise I'd made to Charles. Take care of yourself, Diane, he used to say. His voice, a low, comforting rumble, as we sat on the porch swing. When I'm gone, you have to be the strong one. Isai had wiping my flour-dusted hands on my apron. I suppose I always had been. It was a role I had accepted without question. The clinic was an island of sterile quiet in a busy world, the air chilled, smelling faintly of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol. The magazines on the waiting room table were 6 months out of date. I sat, my hands folded in my lap, listening to the gentle click-clack of the receptionist's keyboard. Dr. Chen had been my physician for 15 years. A kind, steady man with gentle eyes and a reassuring calm that could soothe any worry. But today, something was wrong from the moment he walked into the examination room. His usual warm smile was a ghost of its former self. A brief, tight stretch of his lips that didn't reach his weary eyes. He went through the motions listening to my lungs, checking my reflexes, but his movements were tense. His usual fluid grace replaced by a subtle, jerky anxiety. He kept glancing toward the closed door, as if expecting it to burst open. "So, how's the garden coming along?" "Diane," he asked, his voice a little too quiet, his focus on my chart, not on me. "The roses are doing beautifully," I said, trying to fill the strange silence. "The hydrangeas, not so much this year." "Ah," he murmured, making a note. It felt like we were reading lines from a script. He wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. The vinyl was cold against my skin, and the sudden constriction was a shock as the cuff inflated. Squeezing tighter, he leaned in, his face close to mine, his eyes darting once more to the door, his other hand, hidden from view by my body, moved with a sudden, swift purpose, slipping into the pocket of my coat, which was draped over the back of the chair. I felt the faint, distinct crinkle of folded paper. My body went rigid. He looked me straight in the eye then, and for the first time, I saw not a doctor, but a deeply troubled man. The professional mask had fallen away, revealing a raw, urgent warning. "Your heart is strong, Diane," he whispered, his voice so low it was almost lost in the hiss of the cuff deflating. "Stronger than you think. You need to listen to it." Then, just as quickly, he straightened up, his professional demeanor snapping back into place like a shield. He scribbled a final note in my chart. "We'll see you in 3 months. Keep up with the walking." I walked out of the clinic in a complete daze. The afternoon sun seemed harsh and interrogating. In the sounds of traffic, an aggressive roar, I managed to get to my car, fumbling with the keys, and slumped into the driver's seat. For a long moment, I just sat there, the engine off, the quiet of the car amplifying the frantic pounding in my ears. My hand trembled as I reached into my coat pocket. The note was there. It was real. It was a small, brutally torn piece of a prescription pad, folded into a tight, hard square. I unfolded it. The words were written in a hurried, spidery scrawl, the ink slightly smeared. "Don't go home. Run." My breath hitched. Run from what? From whom the words made no sense. They were an alien artifact in the landscape of my orderly life. It had to be a mistake. A note intended for another patient. A victim of domestic abuse, perhaps. Slipped into my pocket by a terrible, clumsy accident. Dr. Chen was getting older. Maybe the stress of his job was getting to him. It was the only explanation that made any logical sense. I folded the note again, the sharp creases digging into my palm, and tucked it deep into the zippered compartment of my purse. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. By the time I pulled into my driveway an hour later, having circled the neighborhood 3 times, I had almost convinced myself the house looked just as it always did, solid, welcoming, safe. The rich, warm scent of my cooling apple pie hit me the moment I opened the door. But the comforting embrace I expected from my home wasn't there. Instead, a sudden, heavy silence pressed in on me, sucking the air out of the room. In the living room, Ethan, Sarah, and Chloe were huddled together on the sofa, a tight knot of conspiracy. They had been whispering, their heads bowed close. The moment they saw me, they sprang apart as if electrocuted. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, their guilt a palpable thing in the air. Sarah, who had been holding a thick sheaf of official-looking papers with what looked like a law firm's letterhead, quickly shoved them behind a copy of Southern Living on the end table. An awkward, frozen tableau hung between us. "Mom, you're back," Ethan exclaimed, his voice booming with false cheer. "We were just talking about you. How was the doctor?" I let my gaze travel from his strained smile to Sarah's cool, watchful eyes, to Chloe, who refused to look at me at all. Her attention suddenly welded to the black screen of her phone. He said, "I'm as healthy as a horse," I announced, forcing a lightness into my voice that felt like swallowing glass. "Perfect bill of health." He said, "I'll probably outlive you all." I saw it then, clear as day, a flicker of raw, undiluted disappointment in Sarah's eyes. It was a micro-expression, there and gone in a heartbeat. But I saw it. It was the look of a gambler whose horse had just lost the race. Ethan's smile faltered for a second. A brief collapse of his facade. Chloe looked up from her phone, a small, petulant frown creasing her brow, before her eyes darted away again. "Oh," Sarah said, her smile painted back on. "A brittle, cracking thing. That's just wonderful news. Diane, we were so worried. Truly." The rest of the evening was an exercise in surreal theater. We ate dinner. The pie was praised with empty words, and the conversation danced around the edges of the truth. They talked about Chloe's college essays, about the rising price of gas, about a neighbor's gaudy new flamingo lawn ornaments. They talked about everything and nothing, carefully navigating around the tense, throbbing silence that was the fourth guest at our table. I felt like a ghost in my own home, a stranger watching a poorly rehearsed play. And I was the only one who didn't know the plot. They left early, claiming Chloe had a mountain of homework, leaving me with a sink full of dishes and a house that had transformed from a sanctuary into a cage. Sleep was an impossibility. I lay in the dark, the doctor's cryptic warning a screaming mantra in my mind. "Don't go home. Run." I stared at the ceiling, where the headlights of passing cars threw fleeting, distorted shapes. Every creak of the old house, sounds that had once been the comforting lullaby of my life, now sounded like footsteps of a predator. Around 2 in the morning, my throat parched with a nameless dread. I gave up and padded downstairs for a glass of water. The house was steeped in an inky blackness, save for a single, accusatory sliver of light from under the dining room door. And then I heard voices. Their voices, muffled, but sharp with intent in the profound stillness of the night. They must have come back. I moved on instinct, my bare feet silent on the cool hardwood floor. Every nerve in my body humming with adrenaline. I pressed myself against the wall in the darkened hallway, my heart pounding a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. The door was ajar, just enough for me to hear every soul-destroying word. I can't believe he wouldn't do it. Sarah's voice was a venomous hiss. The man is a fool. All we asked for was a simple cognitive evaluation. A professional opinion that she's getting forgetful. What is the harm in that? It's for her own good. He's known her for 15 years. Sarah. Ethan's voice was weak. The voice of a man trying to justify his own cowardice. He likes her. He said she's perfectly sound of mind. Sound of mind. She's 71. Ethan, of course she's not. We'll just have to find another doctor. A specialist. Someone who understands the complexities of geriatric care. It'll look more official anyway when we file for the conservatorship. Conservatorship. The word was a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. I pressed a hand to my mouth, my knuckles white, to stifle the horrified sound that tried to escape. But what about my tuition? It was Chloe's voice, small and whining. The early admission deposit is due in 3 weeks. Don't you worry about the money. Sweetie, Sarah said, her tone shifting to a syrupy, false maternalism. Once we have power of attorney, we can list the house. It's worth at least $500,000 in this market. Maybe more. And with her pension and all those savings Charles left her, we'll be more than comfortable. Your father won't have to worry about finding another job for a very long time. So that was it. The final pieces clicked into place. My son had been fired, and they had kept it from me. They were burning through their money, and I was their bailout plan. I was no longer a mother or a grandmother. I was a resource, a problem to be managed, an obstacle to their comfortable future. I thought that was the worst of it. How naive I was. This is taking too long, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It would be much faster if she was actually, showing symptoms. We need to help things along. We can start small. Move her keys so she thinks she's losing them. Hide her glasses. I can switch her blood pressure medication with something else. Just enough to make her feel dizzy and confused. When the new specialist sees her, we need him to see a genuinely senile, incompetent old woman. We need to make her actually go insane. A wave of icy nausea washed over me. The world tilted, and I had to grip the wall to keep from collapsing. This wasn't just about money. This was about cruelty. It was a plan to systematically dismantle my mind, to shatter my reality. Piece by piece, I heard my son, my Ethan, the little boy I raised, respond, not with outrage, but with a weary, defeated sigh of agreement. And my Chloe, my sweet granddaughter, said nothing at all. Her silence was the most damning sound of all. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of confusion and grief, suddenly went blank with a horrifying, crystalline clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a coup. They were planning to strip me of my home, my money, my memories, my very identity. The 45 years of love I had poured into them was being returned as a slow-acting poison. My body moved before my mind did. Slowly, carefully, I backed away from the door, my movements as silent as a ghost. I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking so badly it took 3 tries to key in the passcode. I opened the voice recorder app and pressed the red button. The timer started blinking, 0001. Ling 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 R. Then, with infinite care, I slid the phone under the antique hall table. Just beside the dining room door, a silent, digital witness to the murder of the woman I used to be. Back in the sanctuary of my bedroom, I didn't turn on the light. I slid down the wall until I was a heap on the floor. My arms wrapped around my knees as if to hold myself together. The world was spinning. A nauseating carousel of betrayal. Every memory was now a lie. Teaching Ethan to ride his bike, was he already wondering how much the bike was worth? Helping Sarah pick her wedding dress, was she already sizing up my house every shared laugh? Every hug. Every I love you. Mom was now a counterfeit coin in the currency of our lives. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity. A statue carved from grief and shock. As the night deepened around me, sometime before dawn, the numbness began to recede. And in its place, something cold and hard began to form in the pit of my stomach. The first pale, gray light of dawn began to creep through the blinds, tracing stripes across the floor. The sky was turning from black to a bruised, wounded purple. The birds began their morning chorus, their cheerful, oblivious songs, an insult to the ruins of my life. A strange, terrible calm settled over me. The tears I thought would flood me never came. It was as if the shock had cauterized the wound. I rose to my feet, my joints aching in protest. I walked to my closet, my movements deliberate and steady. From the very back, behind my winter coats, I pulled out an old, dusty suitcase, a sturdy Samsonite I hadn't used since a trip to Italy with Charles. Years before he got sick, I heaved it onto the bed and clicked open the brass latches. The sound echoed with a shocking finality in the silent room. They wanted me to disappear. They wanted to lock me away in the dark and erase me until all that was left was a signature on a check. Fine, I would disappear. But I would do it on my own terms. And I would not be going into the dark. I would be stepping into the light. And when I was done, they would be the ones left with nothing but shadows. Packing a life into a single suitcase is a brutal act of distillation. You are forced to decide what matters. Not what is useful or sentimental, but what is essential to the person you are about to become. I left behind the porcelain figurines, the photo albums thick with 45 years of smiling lies, the comfortable armchair where I'd read stories to a little boy who no longer existed. My hands moved with a strange, detached efficiency in the gray light of dawn. I packed 3 sets of sensible clothes, and then, on an impulse, the one expensive silk dress I owned, a deep emerald green that Charles had bought me for our last anniversary. I packed me jewelry, not the costume pieces, but the real ones, the ones with weight and history. My mother's pearls, the diamond earrings Charles had given me on our wedding day. They were small, hard, cold assets, armor. I took the framed photo of Charles and me from the bedside table, the one from that trip to Italy. We were standing on a bridge in Venice, laughing, his arm wrapped securely around my shoulders. That man was real. That love was real. It was the only thing in this house that was. I wrapped it carefully in a sweater and placed it in the center of the suitcase. Lastly, before snapping the locks shut, I retrieved my phone from its hiding place in the hall. The little red light was still blinking. I stopped the recording, saved the file under a simple, innocuous name, groceries, and slipped the phone into my purse. That small device was no longer for communication. It was a weapon. I didn't look back as I closed the front door behind me, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the morning stillness. I drove away from the only home I'd known for nearly half a century, my face a stony mask, and I did not check the rearview mirror once. The Grand Imperial Hotel downtown was the antithesis of my quiet, suburban life. Its lobby was a cavern of polished marble and gleaming brass, with a chandelier that dripped crystal light like a frozen waterfall. The air smelled of money and expensive perfume. It was gloriously, wonderfully impersonal. No memories clung to these walls. No ghosts of betrayals past lingered in the hallways. When the bellhop took my single, scuffed suitcase, he did so with the same deferential respect he would have shown a guest with a mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage. Here, I was not a mother or a grandmother. I was Mrs. Miller, Suite 712, and I was paying for the privilege of anonymity. My suite was larger than the entire first floor of my house. The windows offered a panoramic, godlike view of the city waking up below. For a moment, I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. What was I doing? A 71-year-old woman, alone in a palace of a hotel, with a secret recording and a broken heart. The fear, which had been held at bay by the cold fury of my escape, threatened to swamp me. I walked to the phone, my hand shaking slightly, and ordered room service. I didn't order tea and toast. I ordered the Emperor's breakfast: eggs Benedict, smoked salmon, a platter of exotic fruits, freshly squeezed orange juice, and a pot of the most expensive coffee they had. It was an absurd, extravagant act of defiance. When it arrived, wheeled in on a cart with a white linen tablecloth, I sat down and ate. I ate not because I was hungry, but because I could. Because it was my money, spent on myself, with each bite of the perfectly poached egg, with each sip of the rich, dark coffee. I felt the fear recede, replaced once more by that hard, cold resolve. This was my new base of operations. This was my war room. After I ate, I opened my laptop. It was time to assess my arsenal. Charles had been a brilliant, quiet man, a civil engineer who saw the world in terms of stress points and structural integrity. He had also, it turned out, been a shrewd investor. A few years before he died, he sat me down in his study. "Diane," he'd said, his hand covering mine on the worn leather of his desk, "I want to show you something." He had opened a series of password-protected files, revealing a portfolio of stocks and several offshore accounts I never knew existed. I had been stunned. "Charles, why we have enough?" He had looked at me with those deep, knowing eyes of his. "This isn't for us. My love, this is for you. Ethan is a good boy, but he's soft. He has your heart, but not your spine. And that wife of his?" He had paused, choosing his words carefully. "She sees the world in dollar signs. I want you to have something that is yours and yours alone. A firewall, a parachute. Don't ever tell them about it. Promise-me. Let them love you for you. Not for this. But if you ever need to be the strong one, this is your strength." I had promised, though I never thought I'd need it. Now, I logged into the secure portal, for my fingers moving over the keyboard with practiced ease. I entered the multi-factor authentication codes, and then the balance appeared on the screen. A string of numbers that glowed with silent, formidable power. Balance $2. 214. 582. 37. And that didn't even include the 3 small properties he'd bought in Spain, which he said were worth another $1.5 million. Charles had not left me a parachute. He had left me an entire air force. The first soldier I recruited was Marcus Thorne. His name was at the top of every list for the best litigation attorneys in Ohio. His office was on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, a place of floor-to-ceiling windows, abstract art, and the hushed, reverent air of a cathedral dedicated to commerce. Marcus himself was sharp, impeccably dressed, and had the focused, predatory eyes of a hawk. He listened to my story with a professional, detached sympathy, his face impassive. I could see him categorizing me, filing me away as another case of messy, emotional family drama. "It's a classic," he said. She said situation. "Mrs. Miller," he said when I finished, his voice smooth as polished stone, difficult to prove intent. "They will claim they were acting out of concern for your well-being. They were acting out of greed," I said, my voice low and steady. I reached into my purse, took out my phone, and placed it on the vast mahogany expanse of his desk. "And I have proof." I pressed play. The sound of my family's voices, Sarah's venomous hiss, Ethan's weak compliance, Chloe's selfish whine filled the silent, expensive office. I watched Marcus Thorne's face as Sarah's words, "We need to make her actually go insane," echoed from the tiny speaker. I saw the shift, his professional detachment dissolved, his eyes narrowed, the polite sympathy replaced by a sudden, intense focus. He leaned forward, his hands steepled under his chin. The hawk had spotted its prey. When the recording finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at me, a new, profound respect in his eyes. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice now laced with steel, "they have made a very, very powerful enemy. Tell me, how far are you willing to take this?" "All the way," I said, without hesitation. "I want to dismantle their lives with the same methodical cruelty they planned for mine. I want to leave them with nothing." A slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. "Excellent. I know just the man we need." He picked up his phone. "I'm bringing in a private investigator. His name is Rick. He's not pretty, but he's a bloodhound. By the time he's done, we'll know every secret, every debt, and every skeleton in their closets." The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated waiting. I knew my disappearance would have sent them into a panic, but not the panic of worried family members. It would be the panic of thieves who realized their vault had just gotten up and walked away. I could picture the scene in my house, the frantic, unanswered calls to my cell phone, the accusations flying between Ethan and Sarah. I knew Sarah's patience was a shallow creek. It would have run dry by now. She wouldn't just wait. She would escalate. She would push Ethan to do something drastic. Let them dig their own graves a little deeper. On Friday morning, Rick met me in my hotel suite. He was exactly as Marcus had described him, not pretty. He was a barrel-chested man with a worn leather jacket, tired eyes that had seen too much, and a surprisingly gentle handshake. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He placed a simple manila folder on the coffee table. "They're dirtier than you think." "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice a low gravel. He opened the folder. The first documents were credit card statements. 5 of them, all in my name, but with a post office box in a different zip code as the billing address. Sarah had been busy. The charges were a litany of her greed designer handbags, spa weekends, expensive restaurant bills. The total debt she had racked up in my name was just over $43,000. Next came Ethan. Rick had found proof that he hadn't been between projects, as he'd told me. He'd been fired 8 months ago for incompetence. Worse, He had a significant gambling problem. Rick had printouts from online sports betting sites showing a cascade of lost bets. He owed over $100,000 to some very unsavory characters. Then came Chloe, a receipt from a women's health clinic confirming she was pregnant. And finally, the most damning piece of all evidence of Sarah's affair with our next-door neighbor, Paul. Rick had time-stamped photos. I looked at the sordid evidence of their secret lives, spread across the polished surface of the hotel coffee table. I felt no shock, no fresh wave of pain. All I felt was a grim, validating coldness. These were not good people who had made a bad decision. These were parasites, and I was about to become the exterminator. As if on cue, my phone rang. The screen displayed Chloe's name. I looked at Rick and Marcus, who had just arrived. Marcus nodded. I put the phone on speaker. Grandma Chloe's voice was thin and laced with a manufactured, "Dear Fulpanitz, Grandma, where are you? We're so worried. Dad is a wreck, please. Just come home." I let the silence stretch for a moment, imagining her on the other end, coached by her mother, tears welling up on command. My voice, when I finally spoke, too, was as calm and cold as a frozen lake. "Are you worried about me, Chloe?" I asked softly. "Or are you worried your funding got cut?" A sharp intake of breath on the other end, and then a guilty silence that was more telling than any confession. She stammered something incoherent before I heard Sarah's sharp voice in the background, and the line went dead. We had them. They were panicked, predictable, and stupid. My hotel suite had become our war room. Marcus paced by the window, outlining the legal strategy: fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy. Rick sat calmly, providing the tactical intelligence, and I sat in the center of it all. No longer a victim, but a commander. Late that afternoon, Rick's phone buzzed. He listened for a moment, a grim smile playing on his lips. He hung up and looked at us. "I found the guy Sarah was going to use to forge the medical documents," he said. "A real scumbag named Leo Petrov. Goes by the Ghost. But here's the fun part. My sources tell me Leo is already the subject of a federal investigation for a much larger fraud case. The FBI has been building a case against him for months." Marcus Thorne stopped pacing. He turned around slowly, the wolfish grin returning to his face. "Oh, this is beautiful," he breathed. "This is a gift. We now have leverage that goes far beyond a family dispute." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink. Rick's phone buzzed again. It was a source he had inside a local real estate office. He listened, jotting down a note. He hung up and looked directly at me, his tired eyes now glinting with excitement. "They're making their move," he said. "Sarah just scheduled a meeting. She and Ethan are meeting with a top realtor from Prime Realty this Friday, 2:00 sharp. She told him she has power of attorney and wants to list the house immediately." Friday, 2:00. My stomach tightened. But it was not with fear. It was with the thrilling, electric hum of impending battle. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. The trap was about to be sprung. The 3 days leading up to Friday were the longest and shortest of my life. They passed in a blur of strategic planning with Marcus and Rick. Yet every individual minute seemed to stretch into an eternity of anticipation. My hotel suite, once a symbol of escape, had transformed into a command center. Charts and documents covered the elegant coffee table, and the air crackled with a low, constant hum of purpose. I slept little, fueled by black coffee and a cold, burning resolve that had incinerated every last vestige of grief. The woman who had wept on her bedroom floor was gone. In her place was a general on the eve of a battle she had no intention of losing. Friday arrived. A bright, deceptively cheerful autumn day. At 1:30 in the afternoon, I stood before the full-length mirror in my suite. I was wearing the emerald green silk dress Charles had bought me. It was my armor. The fabric felt cool and fluid against my skin. A stark contrast to the rigid control I held over myself. I applied my makeup with the precision of a painter, a sweep of dark eyeliner to make my eyes look sharp, a bold red lipstick that was a declaration of war. I was not hiding the lines of my 71 years. I was accentuating them, turning them into symbols of a resilience they had fatally underestimated. Marcus arrived, looking as sharp and dangerous as a shard of obsidian in his tailored suit. He handed me a tiny, flesh-colored earpiece. "I'll be in a car across the street," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'll hear everything. Rick will be inside, posing as a client. You are not alone. Just remember the plan. Let them expose themselves. Then you strike. I will handle the rest." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. I placed the earpiece in my ear. The small device, a secret connection to my allies. I was ready. The offices of Prime Realty were an exercise in understated opulence. The air smelled of money, a mixture of expensive leather, fresh-cut flowers, and a faint, cloying hint of air freshener. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers. Ethan and Sarah were already there, seated at a large glass conference table, looking completely at ease. Sarah was practically glowing, dressed in a bright pink suit, laughing at something the realtor, a slick man with too many teeth, had said. Ethan sat beside her, looking relieved. A weak man, thrilled to have his problems solved by his wife's ruthlessness. They looked like a power couple on the verge of a successful deal, not like thieves about to sell a stolen possession. The sight of their placid confidence sent a surge of pure, unadulterated ice through my veins. I walked in. My entrance was not loud or dramatic. I simply appeared in the doorway of the glass-walled conference room. The soft click of my heels on the marble floor was the only sound. The realtor looked up, his professional smile faltering in confusion. Then Ethan saw me. The color drained from his face so fast, it was as if a plug had been pulled at the base of his neck. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Sarah's head whipped around, her laughter dying in her throat. Her face, a moment ago, so full of smug triumph, contorted into a mask of disbelief and pure, undiluted fury. "Mom," Ethan stammered, rising halfway out of his chair. "What? What are you doing here?" I ignored him. I let my gaze settle on the realtor, whose eyes were darting nervously between us. I gave him a small, cold smile. "I do apologize for the interruption," I said, my voice resonating with a calm authority that surprised even me. "But I believe these two individuals are attempting to sell a property that does not belong to them." The realtor paled. Sarah shot to her feet, her face flushed a blotchy, furious red. "That is a ridiculous accusation, Diane. What is the meaning of this? You are confused. We have your power of attorney. We are acting in your best interest." My best interest, I let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. Was it in my best interest when you planned to have me declared mentally incompetent? Was it in my best interest when you discussed swapping my medication to make me actually go insane? "You're delusional," Sarah shrieked. her voice rising to a shrill pitch that made the realtor flinch. "You're a confused old woman. This is exactly why we need to take control." "Am I?" I said softly. I reached into my handbag and took out my phone. My hand was perfectly steady. Perhaps this will clear up any confusion. I pressed play. The sound of their own voices, captured that night in my dining room, filled the hushed, expensive office. The audio was crystal clear. Sarah's sharp, cutting tones, discussing the conservatorship, Ethan's weak agreements, Chloe's whining about her tuition money, and then the final, damning words from Sarah, plotting to systematically destroy my mind. The entire office had gone silent. A young couple looking at brochures in the lobby had frozen, their heads turned toward us. The receptionist's fingers were poised over her keyboard, her mouth slightly agape. Ethan had sunk back into his chair, his face ashen, his hands covering his face. Sarah stood rigid, her expression a grotesque mixture of horror and hatred. The trap had sprung. Right on cue. The conference room door opened again. Marcus Thorne stepped inside, his presence commanding the space instantly. "I am Marcus Thorne, Mrs. Miller's legal counsel," he announced, his voice cutting through the thick, stunned silence. He placed his briefcase on the table with a solid, definitive thud. "My client has revoked any and all prior agreements. Not that the fraudulent power of attorney you possess has any legal standing to begin with. Furthermore," he looked from Sarah's trembling form to the terrified realtor, "any attempt to proceed with the transaction of this property will be met with immediate legal action for conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse." I didn't stay to watch the rest. My part in that scene was over. I turned and walked out of the office, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of their plan. Back in the hotel suite, the camera was already set up. A single, unblinking eye aimed at the chair where I was to sit. The transition was jarring. From the high-stakes drama of the public confrontation to the cold, calculated control of my next move. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my emerald dress, and sat down. "I'm ready," I told the technician Marcus had hired. The live stream began. The viewer count started at 0. "My name is Diane Miller," I began, looking directly into the lens. "For 45 years, I believed I had a family. I am here today to tell you that I was wrong." With a quiet, sorrowful dignity, I told them everything. I spoke of adopting Ethan, of the love and sacrifice, of the happy life I thought we had built. Then, I spoke of the doctor's note, the overheard conversation, and the cruel, detailed plot to have me stripped of my assets and my sanity. I didn't raise my voice. I let the horror of the facts speak for itself. As I spoke, I held up the evidence for the camera, the doctored credit card statements in my name, the proof of Ethan's gambling debts. The viewer count on the monitor beside the camera began to climb. "Bai. E. Ling ling ling. Woo. Ling ling ling." The comments began to scroll by in a frantic, unreadable blur of support and outrage. My personal phone, which I had placed on the table beside me, began to ring. It was Chloe. I looked at the camera, then at the phone. I pressed the button and activated the speaker. Grandma Chloe's voice was a desperate, sobbing wreck. "Grandma, please. You have to stop. You're destroying us. People are calling us. Mom is screaming. Please. Stop. I have a question for you." "Chloe," I said, my voice still level. my gaze unwavering from the camera lens. When you sat in that dining room and listened to your mother plot to have me drugged and driven insane, were you thinking about my destruction then? Or were you just thinking about your tuition money? The other end of the line was filled with a choked, gasping silence. It was the sound of a bare soul being exposed to the world. She hung up. The phone immediately rang again. This time, it was Ethan. I put him on speaker as well. "How could you do this?" he roared, his voice thick with a self-pitying rage. "After everything we've done for you, I'm going to sue you. I'll sue you for slander, for defamation, for everything you've got." I almost felt a flicker of pity for him. Almost. He was a weak, foolish man, and still trying to fight a battle he had lost before it had even begun. "Oh, Ethan," I said, my voice softening with a chilling, final sadness. "You should be more worried about your own legal troubles than mine. You see, my lawyer and I have been very busy. We discovered the name of the man you were planning to hire to forge my medical documents, a man named Leo Petrov." I saw Marcus give me a slight nod from the corner of the room. "And it turns out," I continued, looking back into the camera, speaking to Ethan and the thousands of people now watching, "Mr. Petrov has been under federal investigation for some time. My lawyer made him an offer he couldn't refuse. His full cooperation with the FBI in exchange for some leniency. He told them everything. Ethan, he told them about Sarah's phone call. He told them about your plan. In fact, if you look out your window, I imagine you'll find that the FBI is already there." A strangled, guttural sound came through the speaker. It was a sound of pure, animal terror. The line went dead. I could picture the scene perfectly, the flashing red and blue lights painting streaks across my living room walls. The sharp, authoritative knock on the door I had so lovingly polished just a few days before. The final curtain falling on their pathetic play. The viewer count had climbed past 7,000. I looked into the camera one last time, my face not triumphant, not vengeful, but weary. The battle was won. They tried to lock me away in the dark, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But they only succeeded in showing me how brightly I could shine on my own. Thank you for listening. I gave a small nod to the technician. The red light on the camera went dark. I sat there in the sudden, deafening silence of the hotel suite, the adrenaline slowly beginning to drain away, leaving a profound and hollow quiet in its wake. The storm had passed. Now, it was time for the reckoning. The silence that descended upon the hotel suite after the live stream ended was more profound than any I had ever known. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered the frantic energy of the past few hours. The little red light on the camera was dark. The torrent of comments on the monitor had ceased. The only sound was the distant, muted wail of a siren somewhere in the city below, a faint echo of the chaos I had just unleashed. The adrenaline, that fierce, burning fuel that had propelled me forward, drained away, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. I felt a tremor begin in my hands, a deep, cellular exhaustion that settled into my bones. I had won, but it did not feel like a victory. It felt like an amputation. Marcus quietly dismissed the technician. Rick, who had been standing silently in the corner, came forward and placed a glass of water on the table in front of me. His tired eyes held a new, sober respect. "You did good, Mrs. Miller," he said. His gravelly voice softened. "You did real good." I could only nod, my throat tight, I had done what I had to do. I had razed my own life to the ground in order to build something new on the ashes. The path forward was a blank, terrifying, and utterly free landscape. The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, depositions, hearings, mountains of paperwork. Marcus was a magnificent general, navigating the complex battlefield of the justice system with ruthless efficiency. The live stream and the evidence Rick had gathered had created a media firestorm. My story was no longer just mine, it belonged to the public now. A cautionary tale whispered in coffee shops and debated on talk shows. Ethan and Sarah were denied bail. Their assets were frozen. The world they had built on my love and their lies crumbled to dust. The trial itself took place in a somber, wood-paneled courtroom that smelled of old paper and stale justice. I attended every single day. Sitting in the front row, I did not do it for vengeance, but for witness. I needed to see this through to its absolute conclusion. Ethan and Sarah sat at the defendant's table, shadows of their former selves. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a sallow, defeated pallor. Sarah's expensive suits were replaced by ill-fitting clothes provided by a public defender. Ethan seemed to have aged a decade. His shoulders perpetually slumped, his gaze fixed on the floor. They rarely looked at me. When they did, I met their eyes with a calm, unreadable stare. I was not there to offer them anger or pity. I was simply a fact they could no longer ignore. The most difficult day was the day Chloe took the stand. She was no longer a child hiding behind a phone screen. She was a young woman, her pregnancy now visible, her face pale, but her eyes clear and steady. She did not look at her parents. She looked at me as she took the oath. Her testimony was the final, devastating blow to the prosecution's case. In a low, trembling, but unwavering voice, she recounted everything. The whispers, the planning, the greed. She admitted her own complicity, her own selfish fear that had kept her silent. I was a coward, she said, her voice cracking as tears finally began to stream down her face. My grandmother gave me nothing but love, and I stood by and watched as my parents planned to destroy her. I knew it was wrong. I knew it, and I did nothing, and I will live with that for the rest of my life. Listening to her, I felt no triumph, only a profound, aching sorrow for the girl she had been and the woman she was now forced to become. It was in that moment, seeing her take responsibility for her own part in the darkness, that a tiny, fragile seed of hope for her future took root in my heart. The verdict, when it came, felt like an inevitability. The judge, a stern woman with piercing eyes, read the sentences in a clear, ringing voice that tolerated no ambiguity. Conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, felony elder abuse. Ethan was sentenced to 12 years in a state penitentiary. Sarah, as the primary architect of the plot, received 10. As the sentences were read, a collective gasp went through the courtroom. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I simply let out a slow breath that I felt I had been holding for nearly a year. I watched as my son, the little boy I had raised, was led away in handcuffs. For a fleeting second, he looked back at me, his eyes wide with a final, "Despérate plea." I saw not the man who had betrayed me, but the ghost of the child I had loved. I gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not forgiveness. It was goodbye. The first thing I did as a free woman was sell the house. I hired a team to clear it out, to donate or dispose of 45 years of my life. I only went back once. On the final day before the new owners took possession, the rooms were empty, sterile, echoing with the ghosts of laughter and lies. I stood in the kitchen where I had baked 1,000 apple pies. I ran my hand along the pencil marks in the pantry. I was not sad. I was simply done. The house was no longer a home. It was a museum of a life that was over. I left the keys on the clean counter and walked away without a backward glance. My new home was a penthouse apartment overlooking the city. It was all clean lines, gleaming steel, and vast expanses of glass. It was modern, bright, and held no memories but the ones I was yet to make. For the first few weeks, I would simply sit by the window, watching the endless flow of traffic below, the city lights twinkling like a fallen constellation. I was learning to breathe again, to occupy my own space without the weight of other people's needs and expectations. One day, there was a tentative knock on my door. It was Chloe. She was thinner, her baby bump more pronounced. She held a small, clumsily wrapped package. I'm not here to ask for anything," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I wanted to say I'm sorry, and to give you this." She handed me the gift. It was a simple digital photo frame. She had loaded it with the old pictures, the ones from the refrigerator, Chloe on the swing, Ethan at his graduation, all of us, in what I now knew was a lie. I looked at her, confused. "I know it was a lie," she said, as if reading my mind. "I know what it became, but I need to believe that it wasn't always a lie. I remember being happy in that picture. I remember you pushing me on that swing. I remember you were the only one who wasn't disappointed when I fell and got mud all over my dress. I'm so sorry, Grandma." We stood there in the doorway, the chasm of our shared history between us. I saw the genuine remorse in her eyes, and I knew, in that moment, that holding on to my anger would only poison my own future. "I forgive you, Chloe," I said, and the words felt like releasing a stone I didn't know I was carrying. Not because what you did wasn't wrong, but because I deserve to be at peace. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. I made her a deal. I would help her. I would help her find an apartment, finish her education, and be there for her child. But it came with a condition. When she finished her schooling, she would be required to do pro bono work for the foundation I was starting. The Miller Foundation for Elder Justice became my new life's work. I took a significant portion of the fortune Charles had left me and created a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal and financial support for seniors who were victims of familial fraud and abuse. My story, which had started as a private horror, became a public platform. I found a new purpose, of a reason to get up every morning that had nothing to do with baking pies and everything to do with fighting for those who had no one else to fight for them. One quiet evening, a few months after the foundation was launched, I was scrolling through my phone. I came across the audio file, still labeled groceries. I pressed play and listened for a few seconds to the cold, calculating voices of my past. They sounded like strangers now, their power completely gone. My finger hovered over the screen. Then I decisively pressed delete. The file disappeared. I didn't need it anymore. 3 years later, I stood in a crowded university auditorium. A small, noisy baby, my great-grandson, Leo, balanced on my hip. On the stage, Chloe was giving the valedictorian speech at her law school graduation. She was a different woman, confident, articulate, her face filled with a hard-won wisdom. She spoke about justice, not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing thing that had to be fought for every single day. She finished her speech by looking directly at me, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. She was going to spend her life paying her debt forward. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, a little Leo asleep in his carrier beside me. The city spread out before me, a glittering tapestry of a million lives. For 45 years, I had built my world around 3 people. I had poured all of my love, all of my energy, all of myself into a vessel that was riddled with cracks. They had tried to lock me away in the dark, to shrink my world down to the size of a single room, but they had failed. In trying to take everything from me, they had given me the one thing I never knew I was missing myself. I had lost a family built on lies, but I had found a purpose built on truth. I had discovered that true family is not about blood or obligation. It is a fortress you build with loyalty, respect, and a shared love that asks for nothing in return. Looking out at the endless, twinkling lights, I took a deep breath of the cool night air. For the first time in my entire life, I was truly, completely, and gloriously free.